No one's going to remember everything at the top of their head and have the answers for everything. That's not realistic. It's okay to be vulnerable around that, right? And honest around that. And then as a team, you grow. So having that support structure where it feels safe to be able to say, we don't know the answer, we're looking into it. That's a great point. That imposter syndrome we all talk about, I think it's always there, but you become more confident in what you can do and confident in where your weaknesses are. And as you build teams around you, you look for people that have the skills that you don't have or excel in those skills. Whether it's being a developer or looking at M&A at Sony or launching Kindle in the UK, it's always been about technology at the heart of it and the impact that that can have on society. And that not being afraid to kind of disrupt launch e-reading at a time where publishers were wary, authors were wary, consumers, they didn't know they wanted it necessarily. If you don't push yourself, if you don't try things that aren't necessarily in your comfort zone, you're not going to grow in the same way. So that kind of safety around failing and learning from those failures, it's really important because none of us will do everything perfectly and right first time. It's about having a culture that embraces failure, but then quickly learns from it.
Welcome to the iGaming Leader Podcast, where we uncover the human side of some of the most inspirational leaders in our industry. I'm your host, Leo Judkins, and as an ex-iGaming director turned performance coach, I've worked with over 200 leaders from companies like Entain, 365, Flutter, and many more to help them build the habits to achieve sustainable high performance. In these episodes, we share exactly what it takes for you to achieve the same. So with that being said, let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome to the iGaming Leader Podcast. I am here with Emma, and Emma has helped Sony stream the first blockbuster movie directly to TV before Netflix was even a thing. She's launched Kindle in the UK when e-reading wasn't a thing and publishers were skeptical. She spent 6 years in an optical computing startup, and she's now the CEO of Pretty Technical. Computer science degree, MBA from Kellogg, led strategy at Deloitte, M&A at Sony. But today won't be about her CV, because underneath all of that is, quote somebody else, is a kind, smart, funny, and incredible, humble leader who's learned the hard lessons of leadership. And today we'll talk about the human side of your leadership. Emma, welcome to the podcast.
That's really nice. It's the first time I'm hearing that. No, it's lovely. Thank you. And it's really nice to hear people talk about me in that way. I mean, that's what I try to be as a leader, and so I love that someone has said that.
Emma, you've had a super fascinating trajectory. What's the thread that connects all of it? Who's Emma underneath all of those different roles?
It's a great question. And I think, with any of these journeys, quite typically, where you end up is not necessarily where you think you would end up when you start. But there is absolutely kind of common threads going through that. One, I've always been super passionate about technology. I obviously did a computer science degree, and I wanted to build web applications. And that's what I did, working in the UK and in San Francisco for the very first kind of .com boom, being right in the middle of it. And I loved that. But as time went on in my career, I wanted to kind of move more into the business side of technology. That was becoming my passion, and thinking about, how does technology help businesses thrive? How does technology help customers of businesses thrive? And how can it make a difference? And that has woven through everything that I've done. So whether it's being a developer or looking at M&A, Sony, or launching Kindle in the UK, those things, it's always been about technology at the heart of it and the impact that that can have on society. Yeah, so that's where my core passion has been. And I think the other part there is working in an industry and companies with initiatives that are truly exciting and innovative and disruptive. I love that. That's what drives me, is the innovation, making things better, the change that comes with that. And that's the common thread.
You mentioned that working with Jeff Bezos during the Kindle UK launch was really motivational. You were saying you reported to daily on progress, and weeks would go by really quietly. You wouldn't really hear anything.
Yes.
But then something would happen and you would get like this super detailed question or pushback or issue back from him, showing that he's really invested in that UK launch, right?
I mean, that was incredibly motivating, right? So Kindle had launched in the US already, and we were the next market. So, it's very strategic for the company, but we were geographically remote from that, from the US team in Seattle. And exactly as you said, there was a lot of attention around the launch. And then it was these daily reports around, how many titles are we selling? What titles are available? What not out of the top 100 books? And we'd record it daily. And Amazon, as you probably know, is a very analytical, data-driven company, and decisions are made from the data. So we would produce these reports and they go off, and you typically wouldn't get that much feedback until suddenly there would be this super detailed question. And I think for me, what that showed me is not only like it's motivational because you realize, how important this is to the business and that they do care and they're looking at the performance and what's happening. But I think also just his ability to dive in, like he's doing that across everything across Amazon. And that is truly quite a special mind to be able to do that, to be able to dive in, understand very quickly what's going on and ask that really pertinent question, a different way of looking at it as well. It's not, something that you may be completely aware of or thinking about. And he was just exceptional at that. And that for me was a real kind of role model, basically, in terms of the type of leadership that I would like to be. And talking to people is not just even asking the challenging questions, it's the small things, the thank yous, the congratulations on doing this, and not just celebrating the big wins, but all those smaller achievements in between that ultimately drive those bigger successes.
What do you think the biggest thing is that you took from that? Would it be those small moments? Would it be the attention to detail?
I think actually one of the other things is not being afraid to disrupt what was a really big market for them in the UK, which was the selling of physical books, right? That business was doing amazingly in the UK, still is, right? And that not being afraid to kind of disrupt launch e-reading at a time where publishers were wary, authors were wary, consumers had not really been doing it, so they didn't know they wanted it necessarily and what the benefits were. That to me was really powerful. And then seeing the success of it, and not only the success of it, but also how it bolstered the physical reading. Like it didn't destroy that business. It actually made it stronger. So having that belief in an idea and the success of that idea and how that would drive, when there's lots of people saying, well, I'm not sure about that. It's not going to feel like a physical book. No one's going to read it, or it's going to destroy the sales of this. And, why are you doing that? So that belief in an idea and ultimately, it was amazingly successful.
And do you feel that level of scrutiny, that like really diving into the detail, did that you ever feel like pressure? Because you talk about it from a motivational aspect.
Definitely. Like you feel you have to, you've got to be on your toes, right? And there were definitely times when we'd be asked a question and you're like, oh, what's happened there? Like we need to find out quick. Like we can't take long to. And so, yeah, for sure, it does feel pressure. That can be hard, but it can also drive you. The key thing there is when you're in that leading that kind of team and is shaping it in that way. So it drives. So, so the team feels supported, that there will be things that don't go perfectly. There will be things where you don't know the answer, and it's okay to say and find out that answer. But ultimately, that drives to a better result. And I think that's really important. Like no one's perfect. No one's going to remember everything at the top of their head and have the answers for everything. That's not realistic. It's okay to be vulnerable around that, right? And honest around that. And then as a team, you grow. So having that support structure where it feels safe to be able to say, honestly, we don't know the answer. We're looking into it. That's a great point.
Have you always been like that, Emma? Because that's something that I see with so many throughout my career. I've seen it with people that we've had on the podcast here. It's an area that a lot of people learn throughout their career, right? They they run into a wall and they make the mistake of maybe selling something in a way that don't necessarily know the answer, and they try to pretend and then get into a whole lot of trouble, and then and maybe that comes from a fear of failure. I don't know, but it seems to be that always the most successful people are the ones that are happy to kind of say, I don't know, I need to find it out. Has it always been like for you, or did you learn that through time?
I remember when I joined Deloitte, thinking everyone that was more senior to me knew the answer to everything. And that's a learning when you realize that's not the case and you see them do something that exposes that. And it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then also, what's even more powerful is when that's exposed and they embrace it and, are honest about it. And I was really lucky early on to have, I've worked for lots of different types of managers, and that's good because you want to understand what works best for you, and you need to work with ones that you work well with, the ones that, you don't work well with, honestly. But yeah, I was lucky early on to see that. And in management consulting, it can be quite a cutthroat environment. You're working at pace, you're in front of clients. And I remember literally within the first kind of month that I was there, I was asked to run a workshop with a whole host of people from the client around their technology transition from the old system to the new system. And I was petrified. Like, how am I trusted with that? As a 21-year-old who's literally been in the company a month and fresh out of university, you do learn from those kind of situations, and you learn that, you're not expected to be perfect, and it's okay not to be perfect. And actually, no one is perfect, and it's good to be very open and kind of vulnerable around that. So, yeah, so it's definitely not something that I've always been. Absolutely, it's something I learned, but I was just very lucky in that kind of early stage of my career to see people acting in that way and see people that didn't, and understand what kind of leader and person I wanted to be.
Yeah. Did you find that hard to make that transition? Like, just be vulnerable and go, I don't know. Yeah.
It is, yeah, very hard. And I think, when I was young and starting out in my career, I was quite shy. I was super techie and into my coding, but being, like I say, that idea of being out there and leading a workshop was so out of my comfort zone. I'd much rather have been there writing some lines of code and delivering on that, right? And I've been very happy doing that for the first few years, but it comes over time, doesn't it? You become more confident, and also more confident in your abilities. That imposter syndrome we all talk about is there. I think it's always there, but you become more confident in what you can do, and confident in where your weaknesses are. And as you build teams around you, you look for people that have the skills that you don't have or excel in those skills. And I just think for me, that definitely took time. I think for a lot of people that does take time, to understand and build. And it's not a comfortable thing. It can be quite hard understanding that, but it's part of maturing as well, isn't it?
And just to go a little bit deeper into that, in terms of your leadership style, Emma. So, what do you do when you see that in others? That kind of not wanting to open up, or not wanting to admit failure, or not feeling confident enough to say, I don't know. What do you do when you see that around you, perhaps in your teams, in colleagues, in peers?
The first thing is to lead by example, right? And do that yourself. So be open around where you don't know the answer, or where you need help, or where, you're struggling to do something and you need support, right? Because if that can be seen, just like when I was talking about when I was younger in my career and I saw people doing that, I think that's the most powerful thing. And then I think it's around giving that support, like building those relationships with your team and your people that have that kind of open and honest dialogue. I would hope that the people in my team would come to me if they were worried about anything, and feel safe doing that. And likewise, I will expose kind of my vulnerabilities and do that too. So I think it is very much around creating that environment to have that kind of safe dialogue, to feel supported, and to feel that it's not only okay to recognize that, but that's how you grow as a person. I talk quite a lot about sort of leaning in, to opportunities that you don't feel comfortable about. I still talk to myself and tell myself to do that when those things come up. But I think that's really important as well, because that's sort of no regrets. Like, if you don't push yourself, if you don't try things that aren't necessarily in your comfort zone, me at 21 writing my code, but actually then doing, leading a workshop, you're not going to grow in the same way. It's kind of encouraging that and providing opportunities for people to grow and shine, but feel safe when, they may not deliver everything perfectly. So that kind of safety around failing and learning from those failures, it's really important, because none of us will do everything perfectly and right first time. It's about having a culture that embraces failure, but then quickly learns from it.
I often think about this as a T-junction, almost like a fork in the road where you make the decision to actually lead like that. You lead by example, by being vulnerable, by being open. What would have happened if you would have made the other decision? If you would have hidden away in your room, but behind a screen, coding, not leading that workshop, not going out in the open, not talking to people, staying introverted, where would that have led you?
I'm so happy that I made those decisions and didn't say, no, I'm not doing it, actually leapt in and gave it a go and tried. Because I think I would be in a situation where I'd be doing something very similar, but I'd be unfulfilled. And I think it's not only is that important for me personally to push myself and try. I do that in my professional career. I do that in my personal life as well. Skydiving and things like that. It's not necessarily something that I would do normally, but I will do it and absolutely do it. And I loved it when I did that. But I think that's really important. But I also, that's really important for me as a role model for my family as well. I've got 2 kids, a daughter who's 15 and a son who's 12. And I want them to see me being that type of person, that person that, embraces new things and gives things a try and grows from doing that.
So when you think about your kids, as they grow older and they get kids, what do you think the big things are that they're going to take away from the way that you lead, or both your personal life and your professional life?
That sort of balancing work and family,
Yeah.
and how you do that. And I definitely wouldn't say I'm perfect at that. I'm
No,
not.
that's hard.
It's so
It
hard.
is so hard.
No, it's so hard. But they've experienced that firsthand and they see it all the time. Me and my husband have big jobs. We have big jobs, and that does mean that we travel and we're away from home sometimes, or we have a super long day, or it can be really stressful at times, and it's hard, right, to shut that off. And when you have dinner with the kids, then to switch
Yes.
over to sort of putting that behind. And I think seeing that and seeing us struggle with that as much as seeing when that works well is really important for them, because both of them want to do big things in their lives, different career paths and things like that. But it's not all about that. There will be things that come in and challenge that in your personal life. And how do you balance that? There's no perfect answer. And they would vouch for the fact there's no perfect answer for what they've seen. So I think that's the first thing. And I think, again, that what I was just saying there, just challenge yourself, try new things, push yourself, because you'll never know what you're capable of if you don't, right? And I really try and encourage them with that, from when they were very small with the different classes they would try, to now when they're picking, my daughter's picking what A-levels to do and thinking about her career, and, and trying to open her mind to the various things that she could do and what that could mean. So I think that's, really important. And then I think the last thing is what I've learned through my career is, for me, what's most important about where I work are the people and the how interesting the work is itself. If you can get those 2 things, you will fly. And so talking to them both about when they're talking about what jobs they want to do, what kind of companies they want to work in and things like that, I've been talking to them so much about, think about when you go in for that interview, think about the culture of that work environment. Is that somewhere where you think you would really enjoy working? Is the person that's going to manage you, is that someone that you would like? Think about that, as well as them interviewing you and asking you all these questions. Because if you can work with great people and work do interesting work that you're passionate about, you'll be fulfilled.
It's such a hard thing at that age, though, because they've got to make decisions about their careers based on like absolutely no knowledge whatsoever or job experience whatsoever. And I mean, don't you think that a lot of our careers, certainly true for me, it sounds like it's very true for you as well, are shaped through our experiences, right? The managers that we run into that we definitely don't want to be like, or you know, the failures that we've had, and the things that maybe we're even ashamed of that we've done, where you go, I'm never going to do that again. And of course, as parents, we try to protect our kids from that. But maybe we shouldn't, right? Maybe that's actually what forms them and shapes them. So
I totally agree with you. I think your experiences absolutely shape you. And like we were talking about when I was at Deloitte, I had some great managers that I really loved working with. There's also some people there, as there are in lots of big businesses, that are not the type of manager I want to be, a super cutthroat, or have big egos or whatever. And you see that and it really sticks with you. And you learn almost more from that experience than you do from the positives, because it makes the positive experiences shine even brighter, right? So you're right. I think we can guide, we can share advice, but ultimately they have to experience it, and their experience, will be unique to them, right? It's never you're never going to be able to guide them to the best that you can through everything that they're going to do. They're going to come across things and that they won't expect, and they need to be resilient and able to adapt to that in the way that's right for them. What's right for me isn't right for them either. And it takes time, but like understanding what drives you, what makes you passionate, what you admire in people, what you don't admire in people, all of that is unique to you, right?
love how we start talking kids here.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your Amazon journey. So you left there, you went from a company with all the resources,
I know.
to something that's, I don't know, 6 years, I think, right? And
Very different. Yeah, yeah.
like during that 6 years, have you ever had these thoughts of, oh my God, what have I done here?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So what drove that decision? There's a couple of things, right? One, um, I absolutely loved and thrived from the entrepreneurial aspect to launching Kindle in the UK. And then in subsequent markets, right? We had local teams that we supported then. And it got to a point where that business was thriving, but becoming, an established business. And my brain was like, what's next? I need another challenge, right? At that time. And I'd also worked at Sony in M&A, and we'd invested in a lot of startups, and always been quite intrigued and excited when I was talking to founders at those businesses and thinking about what that would be like. And that's what drove that kind of leap professionally, was actually, I do want to go and work in the startup. So I want to be there from the beginning. I was the second person that joined that startup after the founder, who was like the brains behind the technology, and he needed someone with the business side. And when I say business side, it literally was everything from, investment to building partnerships to hiring to managing shareholders, running the finance, because we didn't, have a finance manager, to do marketing, like literally everything around it is where I started. And I just wanted to experience that. And I think also there was a safety net, absolutely, around launching Kindle. Amazon's a big company. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't have pulled the plug if it hadn't gone well, but they are a big company with resources. We weren't looking at cash flow. We were looking at, the financial success of the business. So I wanted to experience that. And it was always something I wanted to dip my toe in. At the same time, personally, I just had my second child. And I was looking, with my first child, she was quite poorly when she was 2. We didn't know what that was. And I was trying to juggle that with launching Kindle. It ended up that she was celiac. Luckily, that's something that we can easily manage. But at the time, it was really, really scary. And she was really unwell. And I was trying to manage that with being there for her and my husband being there for her as well, whilst doing everything. We were in a really high pressure environment, and then also being pregnant second. So we'd made a decision that we wanted to move back to Ipswich, which is where I grew up. I've got a big family support system here, which was really, really helpful and valuable. And so we moved back here, and that, that kind of drove part of my decision to leave Amazon as well. One, wanting a new challenge, but also two, just geographically, I couldn't commute into the office anymore. And the entrepreneurship, that was a really interesting, because it gave me the opportunity to go back to work part-time, actually, because I couldn't afford a full-time business person at that point. And that worked perfectly for me, right? With my young family, I wanted to do part-time. I could throw myself into something that was super interesting and really experience that. But it just worked for us in every sense at that point in our lives. And as that business grew, my commitment to the business in terms of the time I could spend on it was able to grow as the kids went to school and things like that. So it was a really great experience. I love the technology is super innovative, super disruptive. It was literally taking the processing of data that everyone was using Intel chips for to a completely different level. It's still going strong, but yeah, we were pioneers in that space. So it was really fascinating kind of being in that environment at that time. And yeah, and I really enjoyed kind of growing with the company. It's not smooth. A journey like that is never smooth, especially in, having to manage that cash, constantly fundraising because it was a pre-revenue business. So managing shareholders, we had a lot of shareholders. So managing all of them and making sure they're all happy was, took a lot of time and focus, and then bringing in money to make sure the business could grow, hiring people and doing that all at the right time, trying to just juggle all those balls and let the founder and the technical team focus on what they were doing, which is building this technology for the very first time, was a real challenge. And there was definitely points right before COVID, for example, we were trying to do a fundraise. The technology hit a block. And so we had to pause on the fundraise because we had to kind of work out how we were going to get around this technical challenge. And then COVID hit and the lab shut down. And it was like, how do we manage this? Really uncertain period. We had to make cutbacks with the team, which was really hard. We did get some support from the government in terms of the furlough scheme in the UK, which helped a bit, but it was really difficult because we literally hit this thing at the worst time. Luckily, ultimately, the technical team that were amazing managed to work out how to get around that, and we could build the company back up. But that was the point where I even stepped back from the company and I went and joined Rocker, and then ultimately Pretty Technical in gaming, because we had to bring it right back down just to the few core technical people who could really focus on that challenge. So sometimes, you have to make these really difficult decisions, and it's hard. It's hard making those decisions at the time. So you're balancing all of those things, right, to try and do what's best for the business, best for the shareholders, but also you're thinking about the team, not just the team that in that case were having to leave us, but also the team that was staying, and how do you keep them motivated, and how do you keep, make sure they feel secure in what they're doing, right? It's really hard. It's very hard.
I think it's actually the stuff that's often not spoken enough about is with redundancies, how important it is to take care of the people that stay, right? Because just staying is not good enough of a carrot. It doesn't, obviously for high achievers, that's not going to work. It's going to be about, okay, what's now the next level? How are we now going to achieve the next phase? But also the other side of that, as the business founder or somebody that manages the cash flow, it's obvious that it needs to be done, right? So when you think back through that, when you think back through kind of funding rounds and cash flow management, runway, what would have been something that you wish you knew maybe as a salaried employee back then, at Amazon, that you've learned since going through those experiences?
I think you really appreciate how hard decisions like that are. I do remember at Deloitte, like a redundancy round at one point, and, you see a lot of really good colleagues go, and you're questioning, like, well, why is that happening? Especially because it wasn't that long later that the market picked up and suddenly they're hiring again. And you're like, well, why is that? Right. You just can't appreciate it when you don't have that exposure or visibility to it. And now I can absolutely understand kind of what had happened there and why they made the decisions that they did, probably. One, you don't know how quickly things will pick up, if they will pick up, but how quickly they will pick up and in what way, right? Because it's not necessarily the same team that you have today that's going to deliver against what's coming either. And again, I think the importance of that timing, making the decision at the right time, which ultimately saves the business and protects the jobs around those that are staying and supports the shareholders as well that have invested in that company and protecting their interests, like balancing all of that is really hard.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your role at Pretty Technical and talking about this story of, big client that was at the time transformational for the business. So someone that it's a business that you want to, it's business that you want to keep, right? But some issues with cash flow, some issues where you were made promises and how that benefits the business. Can you talk a little bit through that specific situation? Not just what happened from a business rationale point of view, but also for you emotionally from the human experience side as you went through that.
It's a real learning point as well when you go through that kind of experience. I think it's one thing to reflect back on it, knowing what you know. It's very different when you're in the middle of it and you don't know what's going to happen, right? And I think that's really important to remember. When I joined Pretty Technical, I came in as CEO. We had a big project with a big client, bespoke building this, amazing system for them. A lot of people that we'd hired to do that. And it was a few months down the line and everything was going well, right? So I came in as CEO, like thinking, this is great. We've got this great client, there's these opportunities. This is awesome. This is how I'm going to grow the company. This is where we're going to focus. The sort of the expectation joining, right? Just as I joined. So I'd accepted, and it was very rosy like that. And then when I actually started, the signs were starting to be there, but they were very small at that point. There was, the payments are all late for this month. Okay. And so, you contact the client and they were like, oh yeah, it's coming. Sorry, there's something happening on our end. And I'm looking at that, new to the relationship, new to the company and thinking, okay, well, they have delivered and paid, these last few months. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And some money came in, but not all of it. And then, the conversation becomes like you ask more questions and you try and find out. And it's difficult because they weren't open about what was happening. Their business was facing some financial difficulties and things like that, and they didn't share that. And it's really hard because when you make that decision to say enough's enough, because we're paying people, we're paying a big team to do this. And if we're not being paid, how do you manage that, right? It's very hard thinking about what's the time to make that big decision, because once you make it, you can't go back, right? And you're trying to suss out the relationship and suss out really what's happening, what's going on there. Is this something that's going to resolve? Is it not? And, and you're asking questions, you're not always getting answers. It's really, really hard. And ultimately, I had to make the call that, this wasn't going to happen. We had to stop the project. We had to make some redundancies around that, like really talented team, which was really, really hard to do, but we couldn't keep them all on without that project supporting, bringing in the revenue. We were a very small company and there wasn't enough. You tried to redeploy people and we did a bit of that, but you can't do that with everyone. And we had to say goodbye to some really talented colleagues, which was, really hard. And at the time, I was still questioning, is this the right thing to do? Or is the money going to show up next week? And then, we've done this and it's really difficult. It was a really difficult time and very different to what I thought I was coming in to do as well. I was really conscious about what we talked about earlier, about the team that was left and how we keep them motivated and focused, like having had that big setback. And we stopped the work with the client and the client ultimately went out of business. So it was the right decision. You don't know that at the time until you look back in hindsight, right? And then you do question. You also think, well, should I have done that earlier? Should I have done that a bit earlier, or not? Right? You just do the best of of what you think at the time.
It's all on your shoulders, right, Emma? That's the hard bit. Like you're ultimately, as they say, the buck stops with you, right? And so, I mean, how do you deal with that? Because yes, in hindsight, maybe you should have done it earlier, maybe later, maybe it was the perfect time. Problem is when you're in the middle of it, it's just chaos and there is no right decision.
Yeah, I mean, look, it can be quite lonely, right, in that role. I feel I'm really lucky at Pretty Technical because the two founders in particular are super supportive and very involved, and I can talk to them at any time. So about this kind of decision, and we go through it, you know, and they're intimately involved in the business and what it does. So I didn't feel like I was doing it on my own. I was able to kind of, yeah, just talk through it with them. I have now we've built a really great senior C team as well. And again, you know, we went through something quite recently, also difficult, where we had an investor in the company who didn't pay the last kind of investment tranche. Not anything to do with us because we hit all our targets, but they just were unable to. And again, the team, seeing that C-suite team, well, one, it was around at what point do I share that information? And then seeing that C-suite team really pull together to help the company transition through that period was amazing to see. And I think that really helped me, right? Not feeling alone, not feeling like we've got a really smart team of individuals. The founders are really smart and involved, and collectively, you know, we can make what we think is the right decision for the company at the time. And I think, yeah, that helps a lot. And if you don't have that in the company, you know, then what would I have done? I think you look for support systems outside, right? Those networks and of safe spaces where you can share kind of what's going on and get you know, feedback or advice, or just having someone listen to you, you know, and listen to what you're going through. And even if they can't advise, because sometimes when you're not in it, it's hard to know. But I think it's really important to try and make sure you have got that support system around you, because yeah, it's very tough at points.
It's you, right? And there's certain things that you can't discuss yet that have to stay with you. And that, yeah, that loneliness, I think, is one of the hardest bits that any founder or CEO has to deal with, you know, despite having a really strong C-level.
You have to remember, you know, like you may need support, but it may not be the right time. You've got to think about them and what's important for them, and is bringing them in. You're going to then like occupy their headspace with this issue, and is that the right thing for the business, or is it better that they're focusing on what they're doing right now, and ultimately that benefits the business? So you're constantly thinking about what's right for the business as a whole, rather than individually what you need. And that's where it's hard.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Okay, let's talk about the opposite side of that. What are some of the things that have made you? What are some of the moments? Maybe not just with Pretty Technical, but what are some of the moments that made you the proudest in your career? Some, you know, the aspects that you've grown through where you thought, well, this is really like I'll remember this forever.
I'm going to give you a kind of a leadership example, you know, rather than a specific delivery example to start with. And that really, I think, is around when you see people grow, when you give them the opportunity to grow and you see them grow under your leadership. You know, when you see that person come in as a project manager or as a developer and see them just grow through the business up to director of product, or you know, or tech lead or whatever, and seeing them thrive, that always is one of the most proudest things. Like when you see that happen and you feel that you've influenced and helped make that happen. Yeah, so that for me, like, really drives me when I see that. I just love to see that that personal development. One of the things that we talked about at Amazon, and you know, I feel like we try to do, so it's not just me, it's me and the C team, is you know, when you're bringing in new talent, think about how you raise the bar. So And at Amazon, what that specifically meant is when you're building a team and you're recruiting from outside, if that person is not better than 50% of your team, don't hire them, right? Because you're constantly going to make your team better. And that's really hard to do because you think your team's great. You're like, how can they be better than 50% of my awesome team? But ultimately, by bringing in people that have different experiences, different perspectives, different ways of thinking. A great example in the C team, 2 people that came in fairly recently, Sarah and Chris. Sarah's come in with her operator background, right? We didn't have anyone in the business. We're a B2B business. We didn't have anyone with that kind of direct operator experience. And seeing that in practice is so valuable, like that perspective that she brings. Again, with Chris, right? He's come from managing big projects with Oracle implementations and for all different types of clients and regulated environments and non-regulated environments, and just seeing that kind of that process that he goes through and that structure he brings and how he manages client relationships around that and communications. He's fantastic at it. And you see how that builds to your already amazing core team that we had in place. So yeah, for me, those are kind of the proudest moments. There's always things you could say, launching Kindle in the UK, right? That's one of the things I've done, and I am really proud of that and how successful that was. But for me, that's eclipsed by those moments of seeing people thrive and teams thrive, right?
I love that. That's so amazing, Emma. Really love that. Because from the outside, that's probably what everybody would say. Yeah, of course it's going to be Kindle. Of course it's going to be the streaming before streaming was a thing. It's usually not, right? It's usually the people. So you talked about you admire leaders that are inspirational and kind, creative and disruptive, strategic, but also good humans. You've obviously seen both kinds, right? The ones that really embody that, but also the ones that really don't. I've spoken with people around you. You're the first one, right? You're the person that embodies that.
I hope so.
That's what I hear anyway. But I do think that the things that we've spoken about before, the cash flow, the stress, in previous role and current roles, that the family life, right? Anything really can put so much pressure on you that you kind of start swerving a little bit towards that latter person, right? The person that doesn't necessarily embody that because your head's just not in the right place. So, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that pressure?
You do need to be able to have some coping mechanisms around that because, of course, those situations happen, right? And you're stressed. And for me, it's stepping away, first of all. I like to run. I do stress a lot, especially when I'm stressed, that the running goes up. But again, it's having that quiet space and that headspace to think and just take a step back. I also like to talk things through with people. So, we talked a bit earlier about Andy and Andre, the founders, and how great and supportive they are. And I feel like I can go to them and talk to them and a kind of a space away from what's happening. But even when when that's not possible, then it's people outside, right? So I have a really supportive husband that we can chat about these things, and friendship groups that are completely outside of the industry, but are always there to talk with. And I think that's really key. Yeah. Again, it's unique for everyone, isn't it? And it's finding out what works for you, but it is super important to step away. I find it very difficult to put that face on.
Tell it straight away, yeah?
Yeah. So again, and I think it's important that I am honest like that. Maybe I'm not too honest sometimes, but I am very open. They do know what I'm saying is what they guess. That's actually the reality. So yeah, it's just kind of working through what works for you. And I think, again, that's not something that immediately. It takes time. What I don't want to do is, lose it in front of everyone and all of that. So just think about your mental well-being and the kind of the tips and techniques that work for you. For me, it's talking to others outside and exercise. And I guess family time too, right? Family time, because, the kids don't want to, not going to be interested. So sometimes talking about something completely different, what they've done at school that day, what drama was happening in English or something like that, just takes you away from it a little bit. So
do you have warning signs, Emma? Things that where you notice? So you were saying like people that know you well, they can see it on you straight away. But what about yourself? Do you have signs where you go, oh, I need to take a step back here. It's just all a little bit too much.
Yeah, I guess it's like a feeling. It could be like there is an urge quite often. Keyboard warriors, right? If something has blown up like that to this like, and I will step away from doing that. I won't type what I want to type at that particular point and move away and come back. So it's that, I guess. Yeah, just being able to like recognize the signs that the kind of agitation and just taking a step back, taking taking the dog for a walk, doing that kind of stuff, just to just get some breathing space and headspace and time to kind of think about it.
That's really good, because a lot of people, they'll just send that email, right? They'll just power through it, and they'll just, because it's short-term relief for a lot of long-term problems.
Yeah. It's so easy to do in this time though, isn't it? Like, and I think written communication, like we rely on it so heavily, the texts, the WhatsApps, the Slack messages. And you can even, you can write something that's not intended in that way and can be completely read the wrong way. And we need to remember the importance and the power of having those verbal conversations and picking up on the social cues, and whether that's on a video call like we're doing or in person at a conference and things like that, or just picking up the phone
Yes.
and talking to, it can make such a difference.
Massive. I want to talk a little bit about female leadership as well. You're a woman leading a tech company in iGaming, but of course, as a techie yourself, you've always been in an environment which is heavily male dominated. Also, you've got a leadership team with 50% female leadership.
Yeah, really happy about that. Proud of it.
But not because of quality, right? Just because of quality. What I'd love to talk about, we spoke about this a little bit before, is kind of the unwritten rules that you have to, that you see that maybe men don't see, that the challenges that you had to face that men perhaps are oblivious to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really passionate about this topic as us. I'm really happy that you've brought it up. I think, to set context, what we were talking about, when I did my computer science degree at Nottingham, it was one woman to every 10 men. And, and that's kind of been the sort of backdrop in my career, like you say, in tech, in iGaming, in, all of these fields that I've been in, it's heavily male dominated. For me, and this is a way that I've grown as well and learned to adapt, but especially at the start, we talked a bit about how, I was quieter, a bit shyer as well, a bit more introvert at the beginning. And it was about getting your voice heard and how you do that. Especially when you're in group settings and discussing, it could be anything, discussing an idea, discussing an approach to solving a problem. So me personally, getting the confidence to be able to say my views and that they were, and how important it is to do that. But then around the audience that's there, recognizing that there's different types of people in this group and giving those people the opportunity to share their ideas and encouraging it. Like, I'm much better at it now, but at the time, I found that really hard. And in some groups, because people just aren't aware of it, it didn't happen, right? So it comes from both ways. I think me pushing myself to make sure my voice is heard. And you almost, I think, sometimes as a woman in that kind of environment, you have to push harder, in certain situations. And then the rest of that group being aware and supportive around that is really important. And, it's one thing that I try to do as a leader, again, is make sure that all those voices are heard. And if someone is being a little quiet, like to ask them their opinion and make sure you draw that out, because some of the best ideas come that way, right? And it's not always from the loudest voice in the room. A lot of the time, it's not that way. So I think that's one of the key things I would say, and I think it's also that work-life balance. It's obviously not always like this, but a lot of times that kind of family demands and stuff can fall more heavily on the woman than the man. I felt like that for sure. And it's being aware of that and making sure, one, that people feel, open and comfortable around sharing when there is a challenge there and supporting them with that. What we do in our company are pretty technical, and I lead this from the top to make sure I'm doing it too, is, if someone needs to step away and go, pick up their kid from school, or their kid's sick, or take someone to a dentist appointment or whatever, they can just do that. Just let us know. So we're not like chasing you, but it's totally fine. You can manage your time, and we trust you to manage your time. And actually, if you're not managing it right, then it's, it doesn't work, right? But you're empowered to do that. And we're a remote culture as well, a remote first culture. So it's part of, you need to trust people that they're going to be able to balance those things. But I think that's also a real pull for people when they join the business, is that flexibility and that autonomy and being able to manage their own time in that way, or, go and work somewhere else for the summer because, they want, their kids are there, or there's some family, and that's fine too, right? We don't mind. Just, we trust you to do your job. So I think again, like that flexibility, particularly I'd say with women, is really important and really valuable. And we're in a world now where that's easier with all the technology that we have to make that happen. So why not?
Have you had the feeling that you've had to work twice as hard, be taken half as seriously?
Well, within me, I always really work hard. I think it's just something I've always done. I do feel I've had to work hard to get to where I am. I absolutely do. And I've had to push forward, really kind of demonstrate what I've brought to the table. And I think that has been hard, but I'm not a person that naturally shouts about all of the things that I've done. I'd rather the team take credit and, and be that kind of team player. Very good and happy about talking about other people's achievements and and how they've done that. So maybe that's partly of being a female in this space, but I think that's also partly my personality too.
Techie as well, right? I mean, that's quite introvert probably. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's draining. It can be draining as well, right? When that's actually what you have to do, the social
Yeah.
We're talking about conferences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So thank you for sharing that. How are you finding this then, Emma? A podcast?
I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it, actually. I've watched your podcast. I've watched a lot of your episodes. I think they're fantastic, right? There's not something like this in our industry. I haven't seen it in other industries either, but seeing the people that are shaping the industry, seeing the human side of that, the vulnerabilities around that, how they've got to what they do, to where they are, not just from their successes, but from the challenges and how they've learned through that. I think that's so important. So we met really recently, right, at SVC Lisbon for the first time, and I loved our conversation there. And I was really excited to have this conversation. I think it's a really important topic to share people's life stories and how they've done what they've done. So I was I was excited by it.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing. I've got one last question for you. We talked a lot about hard decisions, the course, the challenges you've grown through. If you could only kind of pass one truth to another leader who's about to step in your shoes, maybe, when you think back to you stepping in that CEO role, pretty technical, but what would it be? What would be the thing that you wish someone would have told you no one did?
I think we've touched on a few things through this, like that authenticity and being open and transparent and vulnerable to people. That's how you build trust, and working with people that, it's really important to me that I work with people that I really believe in and like as individuals, and enjoy working with as well, whether that's within Pretty Technical, so our partners and our customers too, right? But the other thing I would say that I think is so important is focus, right? And also by that, I mean, not just focusing on your key goals, but also being able to say no to things that are not part of your focus is super important. And, something that I've learned as I've gone through, because I like to be a helpful person. So it's quite hard to say no to someone and say no to, maybe a business opportunity that sounds exciting, but you have to, right? And I think if someone had said that to me as I was coming into these kind of more leadership roles, that would be super valuable. Yeah. So that ability to say no, as well as the ability to say yes, and that focus on what's the ultimate goal you're trying to achieve, and do these things help you get there or not? And sometimes it's not as easy as that, because sometimes this could and this could, but maybe this is going to leapfrog you further. Like, then you may have to choose that. So yeah, that focus and ability to say no.
Yeah, love it. We call it the not-do list.
There you go. Yeah, I like that.
Hey, Emma, thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing today. Really loved our conversation. Fantastic. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for joining me on the iGaming Leader podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, head over to igamingleader.com for more conversations and insights. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. I'm your host, Leo Judkins, and I hope to see you next week.